Hello, my name is Denise Matthews, and I'm the Chapter Director of Startup Grind in Gibraltar. Startup Grind is an organization that aims to educate, inspire, and connect entrepreneurs all over the world. In our individual communities, we also aim to help support our community and foster entrepreneurship and startups. As part of our yearly campaigns, we have celebrated SG Women during the month of June. For this month, I myself have created a campaign to help give women in my community a voice. I encourage women of all walks of life to share their journeys with us and use my platform to impact them as positively as possible. For this next video, I've invited 3 of my colleagues in the US to share their personal journeys given the current crisis with Black Lives Matter. I'm also a believer that if you want to make a change, you better start with yourself. So listen on and enjoy their stories. Thank you so much, LaKeisha Harrison, for joining me. Please tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure, thank you for having me. So I am, of course, the director in Startup Grind. I run the Memphis chapter in Memphis, Tennessee. Other than that, I teach, I'm an adjunct professor for National College, which teaches, they do associate and business degrees, but they also combine that with like technical experience. And I teach phlebotomy and clinically invasive procedures, which is just fancy talk for teaching students how to, medical assisting students how to do injections along with drawing blood and some other lab diagnostic procedures. So I do that because I actually have a background in healthcare, and my other passion is helping others start their business or help them strategize and figure out, how to innovate their business. And I move my focus from not just helping you build a foundation, but trying to bring more capital resources to this part of the U.S. because Memphis is called the Mid-South, so our geographical outreach includes parts of northern Mississippi, East Tennessee, West Tennessee, and East Arkansas, excuse me. So we sit on the river and we have all this outreach, but there's not a lot of, we're not a VC hub as even like Silicon Valley or even a counterpart southern city like Atlanta. So that's my next focus, is understanding that investment world and how to bring those resources to this part of the country.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing who you are with us. Obviously, we've been having very emotionally charged conversations about what's going on in the US right now. I also think that in terms of inclusion, the stuff that you guys have been doing is, again, so impressive. So just talk us through a little bit about how, at what point you felt things were going to be different for you, and what has it taken for you personally to succeed and forge such a successful career and be able to help others?
Thank you for that, because I never feel like I'm successful. I'm still always striving to achieve like more. But so I did fail to mention that in addition to being part of the directors in Startup Grind, I'm one of the members of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And all of that is tied into, one, I understand what it's like to not be seen, to feel invisible. So, it just, sometimes the startup world can feel like high school, where there's always the popular, the cool kids, and then you kind of have the underdogs that kind of sit in the back And, you know, no one really talks to them, no one really focuses on them, but they're doing like great things, they're achieving great things, they're great students. And I tend to look at startups like that as well, because just the nature of how social media is, and just human nature, once someone hits a platitude of success, you know, there's a lot of attention that's shown on them, and it tends to shut out the others that are working in that same space, or they're innovating in a different way. So part of my, I guess, my passion for inclusion is that I've been blessed to just meet a lot of people who have done great things, but they just did not have a platform to, you know, share that with. And that ties into kind of what's going on now, even though it stems from policing, that we're at a point where there are people who have been screaming in a forest with only trees. And now, now there are people around that can hear them scream, like they're tired. And I think that happens even in startups, when you think about women that aren't being seen, that aren't being funded, persons of color, Black women specifically, they're not seen as meeting the same standard for funding. So they're often shut out. And now all this attention has been brought in to the fact that there are people who are working in these spaces, they're innovative, they're doing everything right, but no one is seeing them, and they're speaking out now. And I think it's my job to help amplify their voice and to help them get more resources so that they can go on and do bigger and better things.
Well, I'm glad you said it's your job, but I actually feel like it's everybody's job, and it's especially for those of us who have built something or have the positions of being able to communicate in a way which engages with people, to give others the voice to be able to be a part of the movement to do better. So with that, I will ask you my last question, and that is, what advice can you give in order for everybody to do better in terms of creating those opportunities equally?
So my advice is all, like, everything I do when I plan events, when I'm reaching out to people, like, it's always intentional. So I always go in with an intention, even if my focus is on community. Well, how can I find speakers? How can I find individuals who are doing that? That, you know, it's not about them being the hottest ticket, but if they're part of my network, I'm observing them, and I'm making sure, like, I'm looking to see, like, if they're doing good stuff. Because sometimes numbers aren't the way to do that. Like, popularity does not mean that you are actually making an impact or your business is a great thing. And so I look to see, like, what their purpose is, what their why is, what drives them to that, which forces me to look outside of my own comfort zones, which is what I suggest anyone do if they're if they have desire to be more inclusive and to be more diverse, is to stretch beyond your comfort zone of your own network and who you know. And then also challenge yourself as well. The problem with our ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, is that a lot of times we're working in silos. And so we need to challenge ourselves to be the bridges, especially when we are influencers in the way that, like, startup grind directors are, where we make these decisions and we guide all this programming. We have the ability to bring people together that might not ever come together naturally in the same setting. And so use that to your advantage, be intentional. And that's how you can be inclusive without really just having to have the moniker of inclusivity.
So I'm really, really glad we actually have been able, time zone permitting, to have this short conversation. It was such an eye opener to hear you guys with the committee talking about your personal experiences and how being part of this community makes such a difference to you in your lives. But believe me when I say that, regardless of all of the obstacles that you may have found to be where you are today, you can consider yourself not just a success, but a huge success. And it doesn't measure up to anybody else, but to the people who respect you and who will recognize you for the great person you are. And thank you for sharing your insights this afternoon here in Gibraltar, and very early morning for you. And we'll be sharing this clip. So again, thank you so much, LaKeisha. If you want to say anything in closing, be happy to, share your closing thoughts. But it's been a real pleasure to be able to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, Denise. And I'm just humbled to even be asked. And, I know a lot's going on for everyone. This is affecting everyone across the globe, combined with a disease, a virus that's going around that we can't really control. And so I know we may feel helpless, we may feel ineffective. So my closing is just to do what you can and affect the change that's within your own reach, because you can't save the world, but you do have the ability to affect those that are in your circle. So that's it.
Thank you. Okay,
Thank
then.
you.
My name is Elaine Patrice Perkins, and I am the chapter director for New York Capital Region. I've been a Startup Grind director for about 6 years when I started this chapter, and we really didn't have anything quite like this because I don't think there is anything quite like Startup Grind and what we bring to our communities, to the startup ecosystem, to the landscape. So I am an Army brat. My dad was in the Army for 29 years, which meant that for much of my childhood, really until I was about 18, I lived on Army bases or military housing. So very sheltered, very enclosed life, a very good life, very, upper middle class living, suburban life, very good. And there were some things that you learn as an Army brat that have really helped me survive as a child, but especially there were some skills and some traits that I brought into adulthood that have helped me professionally and helped me become a leader and have helped me as a Startup Grind director. Resilience is one of those things. Adaptability is another one of those things. When you're moving every 3 years, you're in a new school every 3 years, you learn really quickly how to determine, who are your allies and who are your adversaries. The resilience part is really about not taking no. I have a very curious nature. I love people and I love their stories. That is something that was developed through all that travel and the different cultures, and that has permeated my interests through my career, and it's amazing for me as a chapter director. My background also is, I've got kind of an eclectic background. So I've got a broadcast background. I went to broadcast school. I was a broadcaster for our state legislature for about 7 years. And I've been a director for Startup Grind, again, for about 6 years. So I've literally done thousands of interviews. So I've got a broadcast background. I have a prospect research background. I have a legal background. I've been a paralegal. So I have a very eclectic and just a lot of different types of jobs I've had in seeking to find who I am. And who I am is a storyteller. I like to think that I have been telling stories probably since I was in my mother's womb. And that, again, ties into my fascination with people and with their stories, which is why Startup Grind is such a great fit for me. in terms of overcoming adversity, my superpowers are with words and always have been. That's part of the story of my life and part of me loving to help people tell their stories. Let's see. How have I overcome adversity to succeed professionally within the community? Again, it's always been about words. I discovered really young that I was not a fighter. I have an 0-2 record, so I realized that words were going to be my way of navigating my world, and that's always been the case. Whether that's spoken word or written word, I write quite a bit. Business writing, I do a lot of business writing. I write fiction. I write flash fiction as well. So words have been kind of the toolkit that I've used to navigate, overcome adversity. Really persuasive speaker and writer. I write something called an irresistible email, and that gets me a lot of the guests that I have on Startup Grind. And it really is all about being authentically interested in someone and doing your due diligence, really doing your research to find out what is of value, what is of interest to that person. All of that has contributed to me being a leader. I think there probably has been a lot of, I probably have experienced more racism than I was aware of it. I think because of my military, upbringing and living all over, I primarily grew up in white environments. So I think there were probably a lot of things that were said to me that kind of went over my head because it just didn't seem relevant to me. And by that, I simply mean that I've always been a person that's been kind of a liaison. I've always been someone who was able to get along pretty much wherever I've been with whatever culture that I've been in. And again, I think that's just a portion of being an Army brat. What does Startup Grind mean to me? Startup Grind is awesome to me because I already had the broadcast background. So I already knew how to, be in the studio. I already had the prospect research background. So I was experienced with helping people tell their stories. But Startup Grind gave me the opportunity to choose people that I thought were interesting and have an opportunity to help them tell their stories. So what it's turned out to be really, in many cases, is also a business development tool, because as you're learning about people, as you're really authentically listening to people, listening is a gift. To listen well is a gift that we can give to other people. It doesn't cost anything except time. And I think the responses that I've gotten from my guests and my audiences during my events at Startup Grind, the guests feel well listened to and maybe didn't look at their story the way that they had before we had an opportunity to share about it. And the audience is able to grab something kind of wherever they're from, student, wannabe-preneur, startup, mature business owner, are able to grab something from that conversation that they are able to take with them and to infuse their career, their student life. But it's really, from the feedback that I've gotten, it's really made a difference for them. So Startup Grind has helped me to mature. It's opened up, business opportunities for me. It's gotten me a lot of friendship. Startup Grind is awesome to me because we are truly a global organization. We are truly making a difference on a global level. We are given the opportunity to make a difference in our community. And that's pretty awesome. So I hope that's given you some of what you were looking for. You are awesome. I have been thrilled to know you, delighted ever since we first met. And that just increases each time. I wish we were closer in geography so we could see each other more often and spend more time together. It always seems like there's never enough time when we're at Global. But I thank you. I love you, and I wish you the best. Absolutely on point that you were Director of the Year, and gleaning from you, I hold you in high esteem, and I hope to talk to you soon. All right, my dear. Take care. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Teresa Gamble, and I am the Startup Grind Jacksonville Chapter Director in the United States of America. I am in the southern eastern part of the United States in North Florida. I am born and raised as a Jacksonville native. I am an African American preacher's daughter, third generation. I am an African American wife, a mother, and a grandmother. This coming July will be 32 years that I have been married. We have two sons, 28 and 27, two daughters, a grandson, and a granddaughter on the way. Being an African American woman, we consider a double minority. One, because we're a woman. Two, because we're African American. Growing up was very unique and different at the same time. I was birthed right after the civil rights movement in the United States. That was between 1964, 1968. I was born right after it. So my parents was heavily involved in community activism, marching with Dr. Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders and advocates for equal rights for the people of color. As you may not know, or you may be watching this video from across the pond, and I appreciate you for listening to my story. But even though you see all the amazing things that we have done, even the things that you see behind me that I have accomplished and done, it has not been easy. A lot of the things in business, most minority women, we have to bootstrap everything. We have to create other projects and opportunities to create the revenue to fund our vision. We have to work a 9 to 5 for someone else, and then from 5 to 9, we have to work on our passion. And growing up, it wasn't, me and my youngest sister, we were bused to cross town almost over 40 miles or 50 miles away from our home, from our neighborhood, into a predominantly all-white Caucasian neighborhood. There was not too many students that had the same skin color as I did. And it was very different because when we went to Head Start, we was able to go to school in our neighborhood. But when we was time to go to first grade in public schools, because of the Consolidation Act, because of the Civil Rights Movement, giving our children equal access to the same equal education. My parents would tell us a story how they would get hand-me-down books from the Caucasian schools because they grew up in rural Georgia in low country in the United States. And they didn't have brand new books. They didn't get supplies. They didn't have things of that nature. Everything was hand-me-down used. Negative words was written all in the books. Same went for our minority schools in the United States where I was attending for Head Start. So in order for us to get the education adequate for us to be able to compete and to be eligible for the workforce, we had to be bused across town. And they determined that based on your last name. And at that time, my last name was Wakefield, which it started at the W, which was at the end of the alphabet. So to me, it appeared the further down your last name was in the alphabet, the further you was bused away from your home. So me and my little sister was bused away from home. Our mom would walk us to the bus stop. My mom didn't have a car, so if something was to happen to us, if we would have got sick, my mother had no way to come to the school to pick us up. We would have to endure it out, and we would have to trust Caucasian individuals to take care of us until we was able to get back on the bus and to go back home. Growing up doing all that was hard, but yet we had faith. Growing up in a very strict-based, Christian-based family, prayer was always the pivotal thing of everything we did. Having faith was always everything that we had to hold on to. And entrepreneurship. My father was an international longshoreman. He worked in maritime on the sea docks in Jacksonville, Florida. And my mom was a domestic worker, similar like the movie called The Help, until she was pregnant with me. When she became pregnant with me, her pregnancy was at risk because she had already just lost a baby before me. So she had to walk on eggshells. She had to wear special maternity fittings to make sure I didn't drop before time so she wouldn't lose me, which eventually led for her to stop working as a domestic worker. And she wound up becoming a homemaker. And in becoming a homemaker, that's when she started baking cakes, going back to her family roots on what she was raised upon. But my father and them, they launched a barbecue pit in our community neighborhood. And my mom ran the barbecue pit right after she had me, based on the story she shared with me. And my crib was out back on the stack of the wood logs that she used to burn to fire up the barbecue pit. So I was literally birthed into entrepreneurship, not knowing that until I was a little bit older to understand. But in doing so, that's where my love and culture of entrepreneurship, as well as my mother, father, he was an entrepreneur as well in Americus, Georgia. So entrepreneurship is part of DEA. Faith, my DNA. Faith is very relevant. Work ethic and rituals. We was always taught we treat people like we want to be treated. But being a African American woman or African American in general, that is never the case. I've experienced from that point on is institutional racism. What that is whether you're going to school, whether you're working for someone, if they see your skin color, you're a threat. It's regardless of what your credentials and your experience is and high standard references you receive, you just a threat, period, because you're different. You have a different perspective, and especially if you're very independent and you have your own, you're very outspoken, you are definitely considered a threat, that you do not just go along to get along. And that's what makes us different and unique as a culture, is to be able to respect differences. And in doing so, I have trained so many people, I have helped elevate so many people, but I was not compensated for the expertise and for the value I provided. So at that point, I was always told I don't have the college degrees to have a managerial position. So I make the investment. I go to school. I have a double master's degree, an executive master's in business administration and a master's in instructional technology. And to this day, before becoming an entrepreneur, I have never held a managerial position in corporate America in Jacksonville, Florida. Even though I trained all the people that had the look that the companies was looking for to represent them in a managerial position. I was the person that would train them. I was the person that would go over policies and procedures and rules with them. I was the person that helped with structure, routine. I was the person that answered questions when the managers was at those meetings and I was left in the department. And it's unfortunate because I did what they asked me to do to get the education, but yet they denied me the promotion. That is a form of institutional racism when it comes to people of color. So I want to admonish you, do not overlook the person that's different than you, that have the skill sets. Give them the opportunity, because they could be the person who is the solution that you're seeking to solve your problem, to be able to move past and beyond that moment where you feel stuck or at drought or delayed. So that I have been dealing with that form of institutional racism from the time I started working at the age of 16 all the way to my last corporate job, which was when I was 43 years old. So because I worked so much to help so many others, it took a toll on my health. It took a toll on my body, where I was sick for a little over 4 years. But I knew, with me and my husband being a 2-income family, I had to work. I had to help, just for us to keep a roof over our head, food on the table, transportation to get back and forth to work, and to continue to, inspire and help our sons out, even though they were graduated from high school. So I prayed and I asked the Lord, there's nothing wrong with my mouth or my hands, and I have these degrees. So from that experience from corporate America, then that's when I launched my business into entrepreneurship, because I knew I could not go back to corporate America having all these health conditions and expect them to understand, because I am a woman of color. They wouldn't understand. They would fire me for absenteeism. They would, shortchange the Florida Family Medical Leave Act, the FMLA. So I decided I had to have something where I could work that was flexible for me. But it's just so many, even in entrepreneurship, there is institutional racism for contracts, for opportunities, for even partnerships or collaborations, or to even be considered for speaking opportunities. It is there. And it's just like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said in his LA Times op-ed that he wrote a month ago, that racism has been around so long, it's just like dust. It sits around, we know it's there, we don't clean it, or we do dust it, we just touch the surface, but we never do the deep cleaning. And right now, in this moment in our country, we need the deep cleaning. Even our sisters and brothers across the pond, your community may not even experience any of this because all of you you look the same, you operate the same, you move the same. But what about the ones who are in the midst of the diversity melting pot, and the playing field is not even? So that is one form of institutional racism, is that as an employee, even within our own culture, we go through it because some people of color was afforded to get the education, the opportunities because whatever roles their parents played in community. And then others who didn't get it because they didn't have the support, they were blackballed, they were sabotaged. And it's disheartening that our own people in our own culture does that. So when we see this behavior and this action, we have to stop it. You have to verify, you have to research, and do not take opinion and people perspectives as face value, because everyone from a time or another, they will alter the truth, especially if they are not fond of that person or they don't like that person and they don't even have took the time to get to know the person. So growing up that way, my husband, when I got married to my husband, then it became even more relevant when my husband kept getting pulled over by the police when we was raising our family. He wouldn't come home at a certain time. At a certain time, I knew it was something happening. If I didn't hear from him, something had went wrong. And sure enough, when he come home, whether it was from work or spending time with his brothers, he would say, "Honey, I got pulled over by the police." I said, "Well, was you speeding? Was you breaking the law?" "No." They said I looked like somebody else. So just think, your loved ones, they can't even go out safe, and you wondering and praying, when they leave you that morning, would that be the last time you see them again? That has been an ongoing fear in our culture for over 400 years, and it's becoming tiresome. So that way, when you see people of color, or you see the social media posts where people say they're tired, they're frustrated, it's time for change, this has been going on a long time. And we need allies who understand and get it and want to help be a part of the solution and not the problem, and have that reckoning moment to change history, because we have children, we have futures, we have legacies. And just for a history lesson, we didn't ask to come to the United States. Our ancestors was forced to come to the United States. Our ancestors built the United States of America. You do the history research, who built the White House? It was Benjamin Banneker. He was an African American man. Who invented a lot of the electronic components that you see? You got, the newspaper. That was Frederick Douglass. You got George Washington Carver, made all these products out of peanuts from farming. Just do your research. And Wikipedia is not a valid, credible source. So you would need to do your research and research those organizations like the Martin Luther King Foundation or the President Obama Foundation that has the historical preferences, those significant people that we talk about, so you can understand our story, because it's not in our American history books. And that's the sad part, because our culture has to teach our own children our history, because Europeans and white Americans didn't feel like it was relevant. Our history should be told, especially if it's different from their version. So back to my husband being pulled over and arrested, and then as our sons got older and started working, the same thing started happening to them. They would get pulled over by the police, they would run the check, and the same excuse would be, "Oh, you looked like a suspect we was looking for." And it's heart-wrenching to know when you're in a family and that your husband and your two sons are just a target because of your skin color. And that's why the criminal justice reform is so important in our country. And not just men, it's women too that has been attacked. You got Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. She was in her own home sleeping, and the police came in with a no-knock warrant and start shooting in her house. And she was a first responder. So a lot of African American women have lost their lives from the criminal justice reform. So that is why it's important that even though you may not see many of us on the news, but every person of color, especially African American, has experienced some form of racism or discrimination, institutional racism, denied benefits, denied access, degraded, not promoted. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to my story, listen to my message, and there's so many much more that I can share. But I just wanted to let you know that if you want to be a part of the solution, you need to align forces with other organizations that's fighting against racial discrimination. If you have allies in the United States who are affiliated with politicians, with congressmen, with world governmental leaders, we need them to urge the vote to pass these bills in law that is sitting in our Congress that for years trying to get passed. When you go to congress.gov, CONGRESS.gov, and in the search box, if you type in African American, there are over 7,000 bills that have been put toward our congressional leaders to vote and pass to protect, to help, and support people of color, especially African Americans. Some of them have been sitting there a long time. And if you have allies in the United States who sits in these political roles and positions, we need your help to email them, to call them, to encourage them, to change the narrative, to help them think about their children when they grow up and ask them, grandmother, grandma, what did you do to change the racism in our country? What involvement was you a part of the solution or the problem? And that's what we need right now. We need allies that's going to help be a part of the solution. So if you want to learn more about my story or more about me, I would love to have the conversation with you or any organization to help you to establish a game plan so we can eradicate this racism, because I don't want my grandchildren having to fight a fight that is over 400 years old. Enough is enough. So thank you for listening. My name is Teresa W. Gamble. I'm the chapter director of Startup Grind Jacksonville in the United States of America. And I hope that you will join all of us, people of color, especially African Americans, to stand up for us, ally with us. And it's more than just money. We need your voice. We need your influence. We need the invitations to sit at the table, to be in the room, to help strategically launch the new plans to make this a better world through diversity, equality, and inclusion. I look forward to speaking and working with you all, and thank you so much for your time.